I found out my parents left me nothing while my brother inherited everything. I quietly canceled every transfer. A month later, Mom texted, "Mortgage is due." My reply ended it all. Not mine. My name is Haley Rose Thompson. I'm 29 years old and I built my landscaping business from nothing but sweat, determination, and countless sleepless nights. Growing up in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, I was always the responsible daughter, while my younger brother Brandon was clearly the favorite child who could do no wrong. The disparity became obvious early. I remember being 7 years old, organizing my school supplies with military precision while 5-year-old Brandon threw tantrums that somehow earned him extra ice cream instead of consequences. My father, David Thompson, worked as a regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, bringing home a solid middle-class income. My mother, Linda, taught kindergarten at Saguaro Elementary. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American suburban family with our 2-story colonial house and manicured lawn. But inside those walls, the dynamics were anything but balanced. Brandon is 4 years younger than me, and from the moment he learned to walk, he became the sun around which our family orbited. While I was the serious, studious type who earned straight A's and followed every rule, Brandon was charismatic, athletic, and struggled with everything academic. In most families, these differences might have been celebrated equally. In ours, they created a clear hierarchy of parental affection. I still remember my high school graduation like it was yesterday. I was valedictorian, had earned a full academic scholarship to Arizona State University, and had been accepted into their prestigious business program. My parents attended the ceremony, of course, but the celebration afterward was minimal. A quick dinner at Olive Garden, a card with $50, and congratulations that felt more obligatory than enthusiastic. 2 weeks later, when Brandon's high school baseball team won the state championship, my parents threw a massive backyard barbecue. They invited our entire extended family, neighbors, and even some of their coworkers. They bought Brandon a brand new Ford F-150 truck as a congratulations gift, the same truck he'd been eyeing for months. The contrast was stark and painful. It wasn't necessarily the material difference that hurt the most, though that stung plenty. It was the enthusiasm gap. My achievements were acknowledged with polite nods and brief mentions. Brandon's were celebrated with genuine excitement, photo albums, and social media posts that went on for days. College became the period when these financial disparities became impossible to ignore. Despite my full scholarship covering tuition, I still needed money for textbooks, housing, and living expenses. My parents contributed what they could, about $300 a month, but made it abundantly clear that I was expected to handle the rest on my own. I worked 3 part-time jobs simultaneously: early mornings at a local coffee shop called Desert Sunrise, afternoons at the campus library, and weekends doing landscape maintenance with my uncle's company, Thompson Lawn Care. I barely slept more than 4 hours a night, but I managed to graduate summa cum laude with minimal debt and valuable hands-on experience that would later prove invaluable. Meanwhile, Brandon's college experience couldn't have been more different. Brandon attended Northern Arizona University, a school with significantly higher tuition than my state university, despite his mediocre grades that barely qualified him for admission. My parents covered absolutely everything: tuition, room and board, meal plans, a generous monthly allowance, and even a brand new Honda Civic for campus transportation. When I questioned my father about this obvious disparity during a tense family dinner, he simply shrugged and said, "Brandon isn't as independent as you, Haley. He needs more guidance and support to succeed." The implication was clear. I was somehow being punished for my competence and self-reliance. That pattern of favoritism continued long after graduation. I discovered I had a natural talent for landscape design and business management during my college years working for Uncle Jim. After graduation, I saved every penny from my entry-level position at a commercial landscaping company, took evening classes in small business administration at Phoenix Community College, and finally launched Thompson Landscapes when I was 24. Those first 3 years were absolutely brutal. I worked 80-hour weeks, slept on an air mattress in my tiny office space to save on rent, and reinvested every single dollar of profit back into equipment and marketing. No vacations, no social life, no dating, just pure determination and an unshakable belief that I could build something meaningful. During this same period, Brandon was bouncing between jobs like a ping-pong ball, never staying anywhere longer than 8 months. He claimed he was finding his passion, and exploring his options, but mostly he was finding his way to sports bars and house parties every weekend. When Brandon turned 25, he announced with great fanfare that he wanted to open a high-end sports memorabilia store in Scottsdale. Despite having zero retail experience, no business knowledge, and a track record of quitting everything he'd ever started, my parents mortgaged their fully paid-off house to give him $75,000 in startup capital. The business failed spectacularly within 7 months. Brandon blamed everything except his own poor management and tendency to give away expensive inventory to impress his drinking buddies. He blamed the location, the economy, online competition, and even the sports seasons. My parents wrote off the entire loss with barely a word of criticism and continued supporting him financially as if nothing had happened. During that same period, my father had a serious health scare, a mild stroke that required emergency surgery and several weeks of intensive rehabilitation. Insurance covered most of the medical expenses, but there was still a $28,000 gap that threatened to devastate their finances. I paid it without hesitation, postponing equipment purchases that would have allowed my rapidly growing business to take on larger commercial contracts. My parents thanked me, of course, but there was an air of expectation about it, as if it were simply my duty as the successful daughter to bail out the family when needed. This established a dangerous pattern that would continue for years. I became the family's unofficial financial safety net while receiving minimal emotional support or recognition for my sacrifices. Sunday family dinners became a stage for Brandon's latest half-baked schemes and venture ideas, while my legitimate business achievements received superficial acknowledgement at best. Last year, when my parents casually mentioned during one of our monthly dinners that they were struggling with rising property taxes and utility costs, I didn't hesitate to help. I set up an automatic monthly transfer of $2,500 directly into their checking account. Money that represented a significant portion of my business profits. Money I should have been investing in expansion or saving for my own future. I never expected elaborate gratitude, but I did expect basic fairness and acknowledgement of my contributions. What I got instead was an assumption that this support would continue indefinitely, regardless of my own financial needs or life goals. The automatic transfer became just another monthly expense in my budget, like insurance or equipment maintenance. My parents never mentioned it during our conversations, never acknowledged the sacrifice it represented, and certainly never suggested it might be temporary. It was as if the money simply materialized in their account through some cosmic benevolence. Meanwhile, Brandon continued his pattern of starting and abandoning various ventures. After the sports memorabilia disaster, he tried his hand at personal training, food delivery, and even briefly considered becoming a real estate agent. Each new career path lasted just long enough for him to accumulate some debt before moving on to the next opportunity. That's why when I received the phone call from Attorney Williams about an estate planning meeting, I wasn't particularly concerned. I assumed it would be a standard discussion about how their modest assets would be divided between Brandon and me when the time came. After all, while they might have favored Brandon emotionally throughout our lives, surely they wouldn't extend that favoritism to financial matters after death. Especially given how much I had contributed to their stability over the years. I couldn't have been more spectacularly wrong. The call from Jonathan Williams came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was overseeing the installation of a desert landscape at a luxury resort in Scottsdale. His voice was professionally neutral as he explained that my parents had requested my presence at their estate planning meeting the following Friday morning. When I asked for more details about what would be discussed, he simply said it would be better to cover everything in person. Something in his tone made me slightly uneasy, but I dismissed it as my own paranoia. After years of being the responsible family member, I figured this was just another formality where my input would be valued and my years of financial support would be acknowledged. Friday morning arrived with typical Arizona sunshine. I pulled up to the law office in downtown Phoenix, an impressive glass building that practically radiated expensive hourly rates. I dressed professionally in my best dark jeans and a pressed white blouse. Construction work doesn't require much formal wear, but I kept a few nice pieces for important client meetings. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 40s, directed me to conference room B. When I opened the door, my instincts immediately screamed that something was terribly wrong. The atmosphere in the room felt thick with tension and unspoken secrets. My parents sat stiffly on one side of a massive oak conference table, avoiding all eye contact with me. Brandon was slouched beside them, fidgeting with an expensive Apple Watch that I knew he couldn't afford on his part-time barista salary. Attorney Williams sat at the head of the table with manila folders arranged precisely in front of him like weapons of legal destruction. "Haley, thank you for coming," Williams said, gesturing toward the empty chair position directly across from my family. "Now that everyone's here, we can begin discussing your parents' estate planning decisions." The conference room felt unnaturally cold despite the warm Arizona morning outside. Generic corporate artwork hung on the walls. Abstract pieces in muted blues and grays that were probably selected by an interior designer to project competence and trustworthiness. I took my seat, noticing my mother's nervous glance at my father, who seemed to be studying the table's wood grain with intense concentration. "As you know," Williams began, opening the top folder with deliberate precision, "we're here to discuss David and Linda's estate planning decisions. They've made some choices they feel it's important to communicate clearly while everyone is present and accounted for." He pulled out several official-looking documents, each page dense with legal terminology and formal language. "I'll be direct about this," Williams continued. "David and Linda have decided to designate Brandon as the sole beneficiary of their entire estate. All assets will transfer to him upon their passing." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I must have heard incorrectly. There was no way my parents would make such a decision after everything I'd contributed to the family. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you saying?" I asked, looking directly at my parents who still refused to meet my eyes. Williams continued with clinical detachment, as if he were reading a grocery list rather than destroying my understanding of my family relationships. "Their house, all investment accounts, life insurance policies and personal belongings will transfer exclusively to Brandon. You, Haley, will receive your grandfather's antique fishing rod and your grandmother's recipe collection, as specifically requested by your mother." I felt like someone had punched me directly in the solar plexus. A fishing rod and some recipe cards? After years of financial support, emotional investment and unwavering loyalty to this family? This has to be some kind of joke, I said, looking directly at my father, who finally raised his eyes to meet mine. His expression was a mixture of defiance and guilt. "Haley," he said, his voice attempting firmness but wavering slightly, "we've thought about this decision extensively. You're successful and independent. You've built a thriving business. Brandon needs financial security more than you do." My mother chimed in with her voice high and brittle like glass about to shatter. "We're just trying to be practical about this. You've always been so capable of taking care of yourself." I turned back to Williams, struggling to maintain my composure. "Can you please explain exactly what assets we're talking about here? I want to understand the complete scope of what's being discussed." Williams nodded and began listing items methodically, like an auctioneer cataloging lots for sale. "The house, currently valued at approximately $700,000, Williams read from his notes. "Investment accounts totaling approximately $215,000, life insurance policies with combined benefits of $400,000, and various personal property and belongings." Then came the bombshell that made my stomach drop to the floor. "Additionally," Williams continued without missing a beat, "your parents recently secured a new mortgage on their previously debt-free home to provide startup capital for Brandon's latest business venture. The mortgage amount is $300,000 with monthly payments of $2,500. My head started spinning as the pieces fell into place. The exact amount I had been transferring to them monthly. They hadn't been struggling with property taxes or rising utility costs. They had deliberately taken out this massive new mortgage on their paid-off home, knowing I would cover the payments, all to fund another one of Brandon's doomed business ventures. "What business venture?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "An upscale craft brewery and sports bar," my mother said with unmistakable pride in her voice. "Prime location in downtown Tempe, right near the ASU campus. Very promising demographics and foot traffic." "And you expect me to continue making these mortgage payments?" I asked, incredulous. My father cleared his throat and adjusted his position in his chair. "We would appreciate your continued financial support during this transition period. Once Brandon's brewery establishes itself and becomes profitable, the arrangement can be re-evaluated." "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, struggling to keep my voice level and professional. "You've taken out a $300,000 mortgage on your debt-free home to finance Brandon's business venture, knowing that I've been making your monthly payments under false pretenses. You've structured your estate planning so that everything you own, including the house I'm essentially paying for, will go exclusively to Brandon. And you expect me to continue financing a mortgage on a property that will belong entirely to my brother when you die. The room fell into uncomfortable silence. Brandon examined his manicured fingernails like they held the secrets of the universe. My mother dabbed at non-existent tears with a tissue she'd apparently prepared in advance. My father shifted uncomfortably but maintained his stubborn expression. Attorney Williams finally intervened. I want to be clear that I advised against this particular arrangement. I suggested a more equitable distribution of assets, but your parents were adamant about their wishes. Is there anything else I should know about this situation? I asked Williams, completely ignoring my family members. Williams glanced at my parents, then back at me. The estate plan also designates Brandon as the executor of their will, giving him complete authority over all decisions related to their assets and affairs. I stood up slowly, collecting my jacket and purse with deliberate movements. Thank you for your transparency, Mr. Williams. I genuinely appreciate your honesty about this situation. Haley, wait, my mother called as I headed toward the door. We need to discuss this as a family. Maybe we could all have dinner this Sunday and work through any concerns you might have. I turned one final time, taking in the complete tableau before me. My nervous, guilt-ridden parents, my entitled brother who still couldn't meet my eyes, and the lawyer with his neat stacks of papers documenting my family's complete disregard for fairness, loyalty, or basic human decency. I won't be at Sunday dinner, I said quietly but firmly. I have some serious financial planning of my own to do. I left the office, ignoring my mother's increasingly frantic calls and my father's suddenly authoritative voice demanding that I come back immediately to discuss this like adults. In the elevator down to the parking garage, my phone began buzzing non-stop with texts and missed calls. I switched it to silent mode and drove home in a state of shocked numbness. The full magnitude of their betrayal wasn't registering yet. This wasn't simply about money or inheritance. It was about what the money represented. Years of unreciprocated support, of being taken completely for granted, of being valued only for what I could provide financially rather than who I was as a person. For the first time in my adult life, I saw with crystal clarity that in my family's eyes, I wasn't a daughter or sister. I was nothing more than an ATM with a pulse, and it was time to permanently close that account. That evening, I finally read through the avalanche of messages from my family. My mother's texts ranged from seemingly concerned, "Are you okay? Please call us immediately," to blatantly guilt-inducing, "After everything we've sacrificed for you over the years." My father's messages were more direct and demanding. "You're overreacting to this situation. Call me immediately to discuss your ongoing responsibilities to this family." Brandon had sent only one message, and it was perfectly on brand for him. "Way to make everything about you again as usual." I turned off my phone and went to bed early, mentally preparing for the storm that would inevitably follow when my family discovered I had permanently cut off their money supply. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and drama, but tonight I needed rest and clarity. The crushing weight of financial obligation had been lifted from my shoulders, replaced by the heavier but necessary burden of establishing complete independence from toxic family dynamics. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what I'd been giving them over the years. I spent the entire next day going through my financial records with obsessive attention to detail, documenting every single contribution I'd made to my family's finances. The numbers were absolutely staggering when laid out systematically. Brandon's college expenses that I'd covered when my parents claimed financial hardship, $18,000. Dad's medical bills from his stroke and rehabilitation, $28,000. Home repairs and maintenance over the years, $32,000 for a new roof, updated plumbing, electrical work, and HVAC replacement. Monthly transfers over the past 3 years, varying amounts that averaged about $1,800 monthly before this year's $2,500 commitment, totaling over $97,000. Emergency assistance for car repairs, appliance replacements, and other unexpected expenses, approximately $21,000. The total amount made me physically sick. More than $196,000 in just the past 5 years alone. Money that could have grown my business exponentially, purchased my own home, or built a substantial retirement fund. But then I discovered something that made my blood run cold and my hands shake with rage. As I dug deeper into my parents' bank records I had access to since I'd been making deposits for years, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Large withdrawals were consistently made from their account immediately after my transfers were deposited, and those withdrawals perfectly matched deposits appearing in Brandon's personal checking account. They had been systematically funneling my financial assistance directly to Brandon all along. It wasn't just that they planned to leave him everything after their deaths. They had been redirecting my support to subsidize his lifestyle and failed business ventures for years. Every single dollar I thought was helping my parents maintain their standard of living had actually been financing Brandon's irresponsible choices and entrepreneurial disasters. The betrayal felt complete and devastating. They hadn't just excluded me from their will while expecting continued financial support. They had been deceiving me about where my money was going the entire time. I was essentially funding my brother's life through what I believed was assistance to my parents. The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. The first indication that my parents had discovered the cancelled transfers came at 8:43 a.m. the following Wednesday. I was reviewing landscape designs for a major resort project when my phone exploded with notifications. From Mom, there must be some kind of error with the bank. Your monthly transfer hasn't gone through. From Dad, call immediately about this financial situation. This is completely unacceptable. 4 missed calls from their home number within 6 minutes. I silenced my phone and finished my client meeting, maintaining professional composure despite knowing my family was probably having complete meltdowns. By the time I returned to my truck, I had 11 missed calls and a voicemail from my father that began with heavy, angry breathing and ended with, "This childish behavior stops immediately, Haley. You have responsibilities to this family that don't just disappear because you're having some kind of emotional episode." Instead of calling back immediately, I drove to my office and asked my assistant Jennifer to hold all non-urgent calls. I needed time to prepare for what would undoubtedly be an ugly confrontation. After 30 minutes of collecting my thoughts and reviewing the financial documentation I'd compiled, I called my parents' house. My mother answered before the first ring finished. "Haley, thank God," she said breathlessly. "There's been some terrible error with the bank transfer system." "It's not an error, Mom," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I've permanently canceled all transfers." Silence. "Then, what do you mean?" "But the mortgage payment is due in 3 days." "I'm fully aware of when your mortgage payment is due," I replied. "And I'm also aware that you took out that mortgage specifically to fund Brandon's brewery, not because you were struggling financially." I heard muffled conversation in the background, then my father's voice came on the line. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "Your mother is having a complete breakdown over this situation." "I'm establishing healthy financial boundaries," I said firmly. "Something I should have done years ago." "We're your parents," he shouted. "You can't just abandon your responsibilities to us." "I've fulfilled my responsibilities 10 times over," I interrupted. "I've contributed nearly $200,000 to your household finances in the past 5 years. Money that I now know was being funneled directly to Brandon." The conversation deteriorated rapidly from there. My father made threats about cutting me out of the family completely. My mother alternated between pleading and guilt-tripping. I remained absolutely firm in my decision. It ended with my father declaring, "If this is how you want to play it, fine. Don't expect to be welcome at family gatherings ever again." Instead of hurting me, his words felt surprisingly liberating. "That works perfectly for me," I said calmly. "Goodbye." 6 months have passed since that day and my life has transformed completely. My business is thriving beyond my wildest expectations. I've purchased a beautiful house in North Scottsdale with a stunning desert view. Most importantly, I've started dating Jake, a fellow business owner who owns a successful construction company. Jake has shown me what healthy relationships actually look like. Relationships built on mutual respect, genuine care, and balanced give and take rather than one-sided exploitation. Through mutual friends, I learned that my parents ended up losing the house to foreclosure when Brandon's brewery failed within 4 months. They've moved into a modest apartment and are both working part-time jobs to make ends meet. Brandon has finally gotten a steady job as a manager at a local restaurant chain. The experience forced all of them to face reality without their personal ATM, me, bailing them out of every crisis. 3 months ago, my father sent me a handwritten letter. The first personal letter he'd written to me since I was probably 10 years old. It contained something I'd never received from him before. A genuine, heartfelt apology. He acknowledged years of unfair treatment, admitted they had taken advantage of my success and sense of responsibility, and said that losing their house had been a wake-up call about living within their means instead of relying on my generosity. The letter contained no requests for money, no subtle manipulation, just accountability and an open invitation to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. I called him 2 weeks later and we had the most honest conversation we'd had in decades. Today I have limited but cordial contact with my family. We meet occasionally for coffee or lunch, but the old patterns are permanently broken. They now treat me with genuine respect rather than entitled expectation. Last month, I chose to help them with a small gift toward their apartment security deposit. Not as an obligation, but as a freely given gesture from someone who has healed enough to offer forgiveness without enabling dysfunction. Jake proposed to me last weekend during a sunset hike in the McDowell Mountains. As I looked at the rings sparkling in the desert light, I felt overwhelming gratitude for the difficult journey that led me here. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their harmful patterns, even when it means walking away from everything familiar and starting over completely. There's a peace in my life now that I never thought possible. The constant anxiety about what financial crisis would land on my doorstep next is completely gone. Instead, I wake up every morning with clarity about my priorities, my business, my future, and the man I love. Standing up for my own worth was the most courageous thing I'd ever done. And walking away from toxicity to build something beautiful was the most loving gift I could give myself. Today I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving completely and finally on my own terms.